Welcome to the session, Market Opportunities for Entrepreneurs. We have fantastic speakers and representatives from all over the world, and I immediately hand over to Lisa, who is representing WSA in Austria, is also the co-founder of Female Founders and in the Austrian and international startup ecosystem since many years. Lisa, over to you, and I'm really looking forward to this session.
Thank you so much, Nora, for this super nice introduction and for giving me the opportunity to host this panel today, which is something or a topic that is super interesting for, I think, every entrepreneur out there, and pretty important because as entrepreneurs, we want to have an impact, we want to do something, we want to bring something good to this world, and we want to do this by entering new markets and addressing a lot of people and growing. So today we're going to talk about market opportunities in an international context and the things that we can do all around this globe. My panel is extremely international, coming from basically every continent that we have. I might have some favorites, I have to admit, because I'm a big fan of Latin America, but that's just my slight bias. But we will hopefully get convinced, hopefully all of you will get convinced why this is especially interesting for everyone. But before we start, just a brief words on, again, why this topic is important and why you should listen super closely and super carefully and make some notes and, of course, ask some questions because it's all about you. And before I start, just a brief intro. Nora already mentioned it about myself. So my name is Lisa. I've been in the startup ecosystem for the past 8 years, mostly here in Austria, but also on a European context. And these days, I'm focusing on helping women and supporting women on their entrepreneurial journey and running different accelerator programs. And we're also about to set up an investment vehicle focused on that topics. And therefore, I'm also especially excited that this panel is full of female entrepreneurial power and to showcase some amazing role models that we see all over this globe. So why is internationalization important and why are we even covering this topic? Well, as mentioned, we have so many global market opportunities these days, so many things that we can do. And especially 2020 has shown that the audience of most companies is actually global, especially when we're talking about digital products. So being international and thinking international from day one is something that every entrepreneur should be doing, especially when you're located in rather small countries. Like, for example, Austria, we're 8 to 9 million people. So it's not the biggest market that we see on this planet. And this is why we have to think global from day one. Also, there are a lot of opportunities out there. And for some startups, for some entrepreneurs, it even makes more sense to start off in other countries where the problem that they're addressing is even more severe than in the home markets. So this really is your opportunity to ask all the questions that you have. As mentioned, it's going to be people from different continents, almost every continent covered. So we'll get perfect insights, and this is sort of your gateway to really making your business more global and more international and succeeding on a very big scale. But that was it from my end. Just again, the reminder, please feel free to ask any questions you have. We're going to cover them. We have 1.5 hours, so we're going to dive into some topics into more detail, and we hope that we can make the best out of it. So now moving over to my amazing panelists who have so much experience, and I just can encourage you, look them up on LinkedIn, get connected to them. These people really have been shaking and disrupting their industries and have brought so much good to the ecosystems and to their countries and to this globe. It's really amazing and exciting to be discussing these things with you. But first things first, we're going to start with a round of introductions, which is happening this way. So I'm again going to hand over the mic to every participant of this panel. So every panelist, they have 3 minutes to present themselves and the country they are sort of representing, and to maybe convince us why we should look at these countries first and the opportunities that we're seeing there. First up, we're going to move to, well, our only male participant. Thanks for being with us, coming all the way sort of from India. His name is Anshul, and he's the founder and editor-in-chief of YouthKiAwaaz. And I'm sorry, my Hindu is super bad. That's actually the first time that I'm saying something in this language. I hope it wasn't too bad. But it basically means the voice of the youth. And what he's doing there, well, he's giving young people a voice, as the name suggests. And he has created the largest youth-based media platform in India. Handing it over to you. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here, and what a phenomenal panel that I'm so privileged to be a part of. As already mentioned, my name is Anshul. I run YouthKiAwaaz, so you got that perfectly right, Lisa. It means Voice of the Youth. It is India's largest, arguably Asia's largest, completely crowdsourced media platform for young people to speak up on issues that they feel are important. And over the last 12 years or so, the platform has been able to engage with millions of young people from across the country. At any given point, there are thousands of people who are writing on the platform, thousands of stories being published on the platform, and really kind of going places and creating impact. A big part of the journey that I have kind of taken, of course, has to do with the fact that I am from the country that I'm in. India is a very unique country. It's extremely diverse. You travel a few miles and there's a different language, there's a different culture, there's a different tradition, and there are a different set of issues. So for any social entrepreneur looking to really kind of understand and dig deeper into what does it really take to be in such a diverse country, I think India is a great place to start from. Another thing that has really happened over the last decade or so, as I've seen as an entrepreneur, the ecosystem in India evolve, is that the understanding around social entrepreneurship and impact investment has transformed drastically. In 2015, I myself became an Ashoka Fellow. And that's when I kind of realized that in India, networks like Ashoka and so many others that really actively identify, position, and promote social entrepreneurs are actually quite a few. So if you're looking to create a solid amount of grassroots level impact, or even create a tech product that caters to a specific kind of a market, India is kind of the place to be. Having said that, of course, India also has its own set of challenges. There is, the government has started quite a few programs to encourage startups, but there is a bit of ambiguity in terms of how do they function, how do you kind of go about it, and so on and so forth. If you really want to establish a company in India, you do need to partner with an Indian citizen. You do need to partner with somebody who is in India. And I think that's the only challenge that you may actually end up facing as an entrepreneur. But apart from that, from a funding point of view, from a scale point of view, it really gives you the opportunity to experiment quite a bit. I mean, the size of one city in India is probably bigger than many countries from across the world. I live in Delhi. That's a 10 million population alone. And when I think of the work that we are doing, we're probably, a drop in the massive, massive ocean that the Indian market really is. So I think from the point of view of issues, from the point of view of the diversity of entrepreneurs, from the point of view of access to funding, the recognition that you can get in a country like India, I think India really stands out. And having said that, I also want to kind of add on that India is a country that does need a lot of diverse solutions. A lot of times what happens is that social entrepreneurs who are too close to home may think of the most obvious solutions to a lot of the problems that we are facing. So we do need fresh perspectives, especially from countries that are actually on this panel that are either dealing with or have dealt with similar challenges, be it in the space of education, healthcare, urbanization, but probably from a very different lens and a different perspective, have built solutions that can really cater to a diverse audience. So I think India could really do well with a diverse set of entrepreneurs coming from across the world and adding a great deal of value to the kind of ecosystem that we have over here. But I will leave the rest, to the questions that come my way, be it about the organization that I've built or starting up in India. And I will hand it back to our wonderful moderator.
Thank you so much. I was just about to cut you off. Kidding. It was almost perfectly in time. Cool. So thanks for this brief intro about, well, a country that probably can't be any more diverse. So thanks for trying to sum this up in a nutshell. I'm sure that we're going to dive deeper into the diversity with its pros and cons in the discussion. So moving on from India to Nigeria and handing it over to a woman who has such an outstanding profile. I was... I get goosebumps when I checked the LinkedIn profile, I have to admit. She is not only the CEO of a company in the digital space, providing technology solutions to B2B customers. She is an Obama African leader, Forbes top 10 female tech founders in Africa. Global Digital Women, top 10 most inspiring women in Africa, and many more things. It's a big pleasure to have you with us. Please give it up. And it's so sorry that we can't do like this real applause and clapping things and have all these good vibes, but we're trying our best to do so. So please give it up for Nkem from Nigeria.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you for that amazing introduction. So I think my journey has been quite special because I'm from mixed heritage. So I'm half German and half Nigerian. I studied in Germany and I studied computer science and biology at the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And then I moved back to Nigeria and I realized that in as much as I couldn't find work as a bioinformatics specialist, I was able to find, a lot of opportunities in the technology space. And I think over the last 15 years, this technology ecosystem in Nigeria has really evolved. And as an entrepreneur, I think that for me, my entire journey and everything that I've done is really driven by my passion to close the digital divide. Because what we've seen here on the continent is that there's still a really big divide in terms of, access to the internet, access to technology solutions, and even the critical mass of technology being created on the continent, right? So my focus in most of my work, even though a lot of it is, sort of commercial solutions for the corporate sector, but behind all of that is really a passion for ensuring that we don't fall behind. So I have another startup that is focused on closing the funding gap for digital skills training in Africa so that we can have enough engineers, data scientists, developers on the continent as well so that we can start really creating solutions. I'm really involved in developing the ecosystem and driving policy as well in terms of ensuring that we have the right type of policies. So, for example, Anshul mentioned in India, you can't start a company without a, Indian co-founder. These are policies that really drive the ecosystem. And I think entrepreneurs really have a really big role to play in policy creation, especially in emerging markets like Nigeria. I'm also an investor in the ecosystem. So I invest through an angel investment network into local startups, to ensure that they also have the right type of funding and that they get local funding, because most of the funding that we see here on the continent is still foreign funding. It's great. However, it also means that a lot of the time there's a brain drain, and the products and solutions and companies actually get offshored, and this really impacts the economy and will continue to impact the digital economy in the future in Nigeria and across the continent. And lastly, I think that the Nigerian market is still very much at its infancy. However, I think for any entrepreneur that is sort of looking at the Nigerian market, you will probably see big numbers, 200 million people. In the city of Lagos, where I live, we have 21 million people. However, those demographics may be quite misleading when you actually think about spending power, right? When you actually think about access to technology, when you actually, and this is where a lot of brands have really, and startups that have come from abroad have really become burnt because they don't have local knowledge. So I think that it's really a fantastic market to be in, but you need to have someone who can partner with you locally and who really understands the market and who can advise in terms of actual market entry and strategy. Because just because a solution works in India, for example, or works in Lithuania, doesn't mean that it's going to work in Nigeria unless it's adopted for the local realities. And from my experience also, the best solutions that we've seen that have worked in this market are solutions that fix our local problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this intro. Also some very interesting points that you mentioned, especially the discussion. So which markets should I enter first, the one with the biggest buying power, or should I go to underserved markets to some extent? Also, this topic will be covered later on. Moving on to our next guest and sort of moving to Latin America. Caro, Thanks for joining us for this session on this panel. Also, your background, super interesting. And some of the first things that I noticed when I checked your LinkedIn profile was an article about you that said that you actually wanted to become a drummer and a football player,
yes.
Which is yeah, quite cool.
You really read about me. Okay.
Yes, I did. Sorry, super good on researching people on the internet, apparently. You don't have LinkedIn networking or connecting requests from me yet. But to your professional background, you're the CEO and co-founder of Innovarock, and you're going to tell us more about that in a second, I assume. And you have basically been one of the, and if I may say that, one of the most important people in the Latin American startup ecosystem, because you helped to set up Startup Chile, which is one of the probably best known accelerator programs across the globe, and sort of a big role model for a lot of other accelerator programs and governmental initiatives from all around the world. So I think that a lot of people will be super eager to get to know more about that, and also about your personal background and how you managed to basically develop this huge and super well-known ecosystem out of, well, more or less the blue.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to share my screen. I'm not talking that much about me, but I will do it. I will play to see how this will work. So this should be looking at my screen now. Share. Okay. Is it fine?
It's perfectly fine. Looks like a super nice skyline.
Okay, cool. So thank you for the introduction. My name is Carolina Rossi, or Caro Rossi. I'm Chilean, have Italian, and I have been in the entrepreneurial ecosystem for the last 10 years, actually a little more, but strongly for the last 10 years. And Chile, what is Chile? It's a 17 million population country, south of the world. We are a 5,000 kilometers nation, which actually a decade ago, we were not that really known for entrepreneurship or innovation, and we were not that open either to foreigners. But then everything kind of changed, and it changed because one of the main problems in the region, this is not just Chile, is that we're always missing, and this is done by McKinsey, and I really love this article, we're missing the middle. This means that we're missing these companies are strong, that they can actually employ a lot of people and pay a good salary, and that between SMEs and actually big companies. That does not really happen that much in Chile, but the important thing is that there is a big opportunity there for a startup to actually become this either really big companies or these mid players in the region that we are lacking. So Latin America is a region that is not really known in my personal perception worldwide. We're just known for negative stuff usually, or just like fun stuff and party and stuff like that. But actually Latin America is a huge region that is in the last 5 years in terms of a startup ecosystem. It has grown in a really, really fast way. We have been having like a good example that I put here. We have a huge Japanese investment fund called SoftBank. They're investing just last year $5 billion in some companies. Actually, one of the companies they put $1 billion in is Rappi, which was a World Summit Award winner. So they good for World Summit Award. They actually got one of these big guys. And actually this is a big wave, and it's a big wave that is happening in the whole region, but especially in Chile. In Chile today, if you jump into doing business there, you're going to see that you have university, newspaper, academia, and government actually making a lot for the startup ecosystem, and a lot for any entrepreneurs, no matter their nationality, that want to join. So just some numbers to prove this. This is the investment fund in tech company have been growing unbelievable, especially in the last 3 years in Chile. And there is a lot of opening also to actually put this money into foreign entrepreneurs, which is, I think, relevant. Chile is a country with very flexible public policy in terms of investment, in terms of opening a company. Everything is digital, so it's a fast track for any entrepreneur, and I think that's something positive. And we are really now into the innovation. Lisa mentioned Startup Chile. Yes, I'm a member of the founder team. This was a huge culture shift, and it's actually what transformed Chile into this hub. So Chile is good to go there and pilot your project or use it as a platform. We are a small market, and that's a fact. So it's a good place to open a business and then run it afterwards. And just to make an example of that, and then closing my presentation, is we have really top cases. I just put 4 here, which Karun is wood-made sunglasses and all kind of material sunglasses. They are big in Europe. They actually sell it here, and they just partnered with National Geographic. We have Corner Shop over here on the top, which they open in the US and Canada. They are Chilean. They're not milk. They're not company. They're a Chilean company that does every single kind of food, no coming from animal, with an algorithm, and they're actually entered the American market now thanks to Whole Foods. Our daily for all architectures, there is no architecture in the world that doesn't know it. It's actually Chilean. So there are a lot of Chilean projects that have been well recognized, and there are some European folks that have actually jumped to Chile and have done really well. And I wanted to mention some of them, which, for example, Recorrido, they're Germans, and they're actually doing really, really well in the whole region. So I just wanted to share those slides, very short, to give you some tips, some idea of, in my perception, a strong ecosystem, solid, and that is open for foreign entrepreneurs. That is not something that always happens, and it has really flexible policies in terms of building, running a business, and having your headquarters maybe in Europe and then moving to Latin America.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that was a very good pitch for Chile, but as mentioned, I might be a bit biased. But also thanks for already bringing examples for also European companies going to Latin America and using Chile as some sort of launch hub, also a topic that we will cover later. So moving on moving back to Europe. As already briefly mentioned. So Europe is, as we all know, a very fragmented market with small economies, bigger economies. And there is one region that got especially well known for this whole startup ecosystem, which is located in the northeastern part of Europe. It's the Baltics. And we have someone with us who is actually representing Startup Lithuania, so one of the most active communities in that region. Her name is Roberta, and she's going to tell us more about what's going on in Lithuania for everyone who is not that familiar yet with all the innovative things that are happening there, and especially the amazing tech talent and companies that are coming from this country. Thanks for being with us, Roberta.
Thank you. Thanks for a nice presenting Vilnius and Lithuania. In difference from other previous speakers, I represent really small countries similar to Austria. We have populations just 2.8 million people. So Lithuania, of course, it's not interesting for startups as a market, but it's a great place to work, to create a startup, and a great entry point to Europe. Because at the moment, Lithuania ranks number 11th at ease of doing business, 4th globally at Global FinTech Index. It takes just 3 days to open a new business in Lithuania. We have big talent pool, small country, but a lot of talents. 56% of population have higher education. Lithuania ranks number 1 globally for technological skills. So we have great Wi-Fi, great internet. 85% of young generation speak fluently English, so it's really easy for startups to relocate and work here. And 52% of young population speak at least 2 foreign languages. And as Lisa explained about Austria, so it's really similar. Our startups already start thinking globally, how to work globally. And we are very happy that big global startups also have chosen Lithuania as their place for developing and working in Europe. We have Revolut, Booking.com, Mambu working in Lithuania, having their offices here. If to talk about our startup ecosystem, it's really thriving at the moment. We count more than 1,000 startups in Lithuania. We just got first unicorn at the end of last year. It's our startup Vinted. I hope you've heard about it. also what makes us really happy that the investments growth of our startups, so the investment that they attracted grew plus 135% in previous years before the COVID situation. So it's really, we talk not only about the quantity, but also about the quality of startups, and we have different possibilities for foreign startups for non-European startups to enter Lithuania, to enter the whole European market. We have startup visa program, and we are also thinking about a new program to offer some grants, subsidies for foreign startups to make their relocation easier next year. So if you are interested more in Lithuania, Startup Lithuania is a national startup ecosystem facilitator. I'm the head of Startup Lithuania. So our main goal is to help startups, to have more startups, to help them grow. So you can always contact us if you have more questions about our ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for presenting Lithuania that well. Unfortunately, I never had the pleasure of exploring the ecosystem myself, but this is something that's totally on my 2021 to-do and target list. Hopefully, we're optimistic and we hope that this will be possible. Yeah, not talking about the situation out there. So thanks. Moving again from Europe to a country that is quite close, and sometimes I have the impression that it feels that it's almost part of Europe. Personally, for me, I'm the biggest fan of Eurovision Song Contest, and especially from the contestants coming from Israel every year. So this was sort of my cheesy way of introducing the next country that we will be talking about, which is Israel, and definitely a country that is heavily connected and related to tech and innovation, I would say. So I think that Israel has really managed to be on the top 3, maybe 5 or 10 lists for almost every investor on this globe. Everyone's looking to Israel because there are amazing things happening there. There's a lot of talent there, a lot of investment, so a lot of money, a lot of fund of funds as well. And Israel is being presented and represented by Omri, who is the co-founder and CEO at Tech for Good. And she truly believes that we can only solve societal challenges and also environmental challenges by actually combining business approaches and business methods with technological approaches and solving, well, the societal and environmental causes. I hope that I summed this up in a way that you can relate to. I think that was a very cool mission that you also stated on your LinkedIn profile. Very much looking forward to your presentation and telling us how you actually help entrepreneurs to scale and what you're doing in terms of investing in them. Please give it up for Omri.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you to the amazing WSA team. We're happy to be a part of this global family. And I will just quickly share with you a few slides. So can you see my screen? Yep. Is it working properly?
Yes, we can. Okay. Yes, perfect. Very nice slides.
Okay, so just to very quickly say that at Tech for Good, which is an Israeli-based company, what we do is essentially, I think, what you guys, the entrepreneurs, are interested in, which is really to find the best ways to harness technology and innovation to capture the opportunities in addressing global social and environmental issues. We don't see them as problems. We see them as opportunities. We work with foreign governments, we work with large corporations and nonprofits to define together how things that they are now looking at as problems that are related to generating positive impact can in fact become opportunities to both create a better world, but also to generate profits. And as part of doing that, we work a lot with both Israeli startups and with international startups. And moving on to talk about Israel and why it is a market worth noticing. So a little bit like Austria or Lithuania or even Chile maybe, we're a very small country, 9 million people. So we're definitely not interesting as a market, as a target market. But what Israel is interesting in is, and Lisa mentioned this, we're coined the startup nation. So the numbers are truly amazing. Israel is the #1 in the world in terms of startups per capita, in terms of investment per capita. The total sum of exits in 97 Israeli startups in 2019 was over $3.5 billion. And all of this is just to show you that the startup ecosystem here is incredibly rich. There is so much going on. There is so much, the Israeli ecosystem attracts, for instance, multinational corporates to set up R&D activities here in Israel. We have over 320 R&D centers of the biggest companies in the world working here with the Israeli talent. And in the last few years, what happened to the Israeli startup nation is it became an impact nation. And we see a growing number of entrepreneurs and investors who are becoming more and more interested in addressing social and environmental issues through technology. And this again creates an amazing set of opportunities for funding, for collaborations, for networking, for business learnings. And I will now stop my share. If I find out how to do that, here. And so just to give you my personal, I think, understanding of what is interesting about Israel, it would not be the way to expand your business, but it will be a great place to come to learn a lot from business experts, from seasoned entrepreneurs, to talk to investors. And I think what Israelis know best is how to take their talent and their passion into other markets where the culture is different, where they need to adjust their product, when they need to create a go-to-market strategy and a business model where they have no personal connections. And from that, I think you can take a lot to later do that for your own company. And one last thing is that collaborating with Israeli entrepreneurs and with Israeli companies can create a lot of funding platforms for you, as there is a lot of government money that is attracted by Israeli technology. So there's a lot to do here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that was, again, a very convincing pitch, and it's amazing to see how many numbers you actually have of your ecosystem. I think this is something that is pretty rare, and seeing these numbers scares me a bit, because I feel that in Austria we still have some things that need to be done, maybe also in other countries as well. But everyone's jealously looking at Israel. At least I have the impression that that's the case with a lot of people. Cool. So thanks for this round of intros. We have one more person joining us in the discussion. She will be joining us live in a couple of minutes. But until then, she has sent us a video, which we'll be looking at in a second. Just a brief intro. Her name is Susanne. She is representing Austria, and especially the SFG, the Steirische Forschungsförderungsgesellschaft. And they are making sure that businesses, especially in that part of Austria, are being supported, that they can start off and that they can actually grow. And they support them not only with money, but also with other forms of support. Please let us see the video of Susanne.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Susanne. I'm from the SFG, from the Steering Business Development Agency. We are a funding agency, and usually you would be here in Graz, and I could show you our landscape personally, which would be much easier, but I will do my best to give you that Austrian spirit and experience online. So, why I love Austria really, really much is because of its location. It's in the center of Europe, the heart of Europe. And for doing business, Austria, I think, is a really good starting point with 8 million people, a good test market. And if you want to go bigger, you just have to look at the southeast region. We have another 20 million people. So Austria is a great gateway to other countries. But starting business in Austria would be perfect for you. What else? We have a lot of leading technologies, for example, in the fields of mobility, eco, life science, Silicon Alps is here. Well, don't worry, it's not plastic surgery, it's microelectronics. Materials is huge in Austria, also creative industries, and of course tourism with 110 million visitors per year. And we have really, really successful companies in Austria. hidden champions, world leaders. But what makes them so successful? Well, working in this business for quite a long, I can tell you the research landscape and the supporting system in Austria are super great. Only in Styria, we have like 9 universities, I think 23 competence centers, startup centers, impulse centers, scientific institutes, hubs. What else do we have? Clusters, 5 clusters in Styria. And that's a really, really unique landscape, especially for research. To give you a small number, Austria has raised 870 million euro in the last Horizon 2022 period. So Austria is on the 3rd place all over Europe. So we love to do research. And the second, why we are really successful is the supporting system. Of course, funding, what I'm doing. So I won't bore you with funding sums and percentages and restrictions and whatever and requirements. But we have like funding for startups, doing research, investment funds. We support financing, pre-seed, seed financing, and also funds on digitalization or for social businesses. But more importantly, let me tell you, money is not everything. So I think what makes Austria pretty unique is our matchmaking ability. The Austrians, as we are a small market, are used to work together and to cooperate really well. So we have a 5% export rate. And based on this, the Austrians are used to working together. So we, as public unit, do our best to do matchmaking, to bring you the right business partner at the right time, to match you with the right investor at the right time, to match you with the right researcher at the right time. So finding people in general that have done or have made the same mistakes 10 years ago and can prevent you from doing that. So, and I think this cooperation makes our economy much stronger and more sustainable, and also in crisis we have seen this, that we are more flexible than big markets. Okay, last but not least, of course, I have to mention the high life quality, our water. So where good water, there's good beer. Wine, food, safe. We are pretty safe. We're the 4th safest country in the world. So I think number 1 is Iceland, but it's cold there. And what else do I have on my list? Nature. Yeah, of course. If you love mountains, the whole sound of music stuff, culture, you will love Austria. So, and of course, there's this Austrian Gemütlichkeit. And so if you want to do business, just call me, text me, email me. I will help you and support you. And good luck. And I'm looking forward to the discussion and your questions. Thanks a lot.
Cool. So thanks to Susanne for promoting us really well, I would say. So yes, we Austrians are super nice, super chill, super friendly people. Most of us, most of the time. And it's also super nice here. Not the biggest fan of skiing myself, but well, that's a different discussion. So thanks for the round of intros. So I think that we've now got quite a good picture of who you are, what you do, and your countries. And we already have one question in the chat. So the audience is getting interactive. I encourage you to please be even more interactive and really ask all the questions you have. Can be general questions on internationalization. It can be hands-on advice from our experts. And it can also be questions regarding specific countries or markets that they're representing. But the first question is, from my point of view, a very interesting one, because it's something that some of you have already mentioned in your intros, because it's related to policy. Because, of course, everything that we do as entrepreneurs and as people in the ecosystem somehow has to happen in a specific setup, framework, that is often designed by the government to some extent, being supported or not supported by the government. And this is why policies are extremely important, especially when you talk about entering new markets. It's important to understand the markets, to understand the dynamics there, to have some certain stability when it comes to also political decision making. And this is why I would like to cover this topic. And the questions that we got is, how can actually social entrepreneurs, or also entrepreneurs in general, actually drive policy development in emerging markets without getting entangled? So how can this work? How much influence can we actually have as entrepreneurs? What is your experience with that? How can we tackle this? What can we do? And how we actually get them to, well, hear our voices? Maybe I'm going to start with Nkem, if that's okay with you, because I think you were the first one to actually mention this policy topic. So I would love to hear your opinion as an opener.
All right. Thank you so much, Lisa. So I think in terms of policy and, sort of getting entangled in it, that can happen very easily because policy is a long-term activity, right? It's very time-consuming. So I think it's really about identifying the right avenues to engage and figuring out, who are the key stakeholders, both in the private sector and government, that you need to engage with, because a lot of the time, if you are by yourself, you won't really be able to really drive policy, which means that you need some type of stakeholder group. And a lot of countries have organizations. So in Nigeria, for example, we have the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, which is a group that consists out of private sector entrepreneurs, CEOs, captains of industry, and the group has different thematic groups within it, and one of them is digital economy. So I'm part of the leadership of that digital economy group. And what we do is that we review policies as they come out from government or as they are proposed. So the government also knows this group as a credible group that engages on policy. The group also hosts the Nigerian Economic Summit. So that are avenues where you can then engage. So I think it's really about figuring out in your own country and your own context, what are the avenues to engage? And sometimes this is being part of a committee that maybe reviews policy. It is important to sort of start creating relationships between policymakers and then policy influencers, right? So you don't need to be the person writing the policy. You don't need to be the person who's doing all the work, right? Because that's when you then get entangled. But I think that it's important to, first of all, be clear on what are the policies. A lot of people don't even know what the policies are. So you must read so that you have an idea of what the policies are, and then figure out how you make these policies better. And especially in emerging markets like Nigeria, a lot of policies don't exist yet, right? So it's a blank canvas, which also means that you can connect in a network like WSA to global entrepreneurs, global policymakers, and also understand how is it done in their countries? What are the policies that you could propose in your country that can be adopted? What are the policies that you think would make a really big difference in your ecosystem, whether it is around funding or it is around creating an enabling environment, tax incentives, broadband penetration, the use of technology across healthcare, education, and so on, right? And how to really drive an ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation. So I think it's really, it will differ from country to country, but I would say, engage wisely, manage your time carefully so that you still have time to really drive your business, right? So allocate a specific amount of time in your year or your month or your week to policy. But I would say that if you're not involved in policy, then take whatever the government gives you, right? Especially on a continent like Africa, where overnight a policy can kill your business. You cannot afford to not be involved in policy. At least if you know a policy is coming, you can figure out how to pivot your business. But if you're caught unaware, then you're dead. Right. So it's really important, I think, to be involved at that level, especially because technology policy is an area that is so new. And even in the developed world, you have, discussions about ethics, AI, how is that going to be shaped? How do we, sort of navigate disruption? How do we navigate new innovations? How do we navigate things like driverless cars, right? These are things that nobody has really thought about before. So there have to be experts in those fields that actually engage with policymakers, because policymakers usually are old, and a lot of the time have really no clue and are very disconnected, right? Obviously, this is changing over time, and we're seeing more and more young people also in government and on the policy side. But it is a slow process, and I think it's important that innovators sit at the same table as policymakers in order to really drive policy, because technology policy is not policy that is for a specific sector. Technology policy is a strategic driver for economic development. So to me, it is actually the most important policy that you can actually find across all the different policies. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this has been some very valuable insights, and I totally agree. Innovators should be on the table discussing the things with the ones who are making the policies. But what I've learned, especially in the last couple of weeks, is we're also seeing some changes here in Austria, and the voices of entrepreneurs being heard. It can happen really easily that you're just getting too involved in politics. But I have the impression that every entrepreneur to some extent becomes a political person at some end and really has this drive to actually change something. But that's just probably the nature of entrepreneurs as well. So Roberta, I think you were the first one to raise your hand and to comment on that. So what's your take on the policy part and what's happening there in Lithuania? Are the voices of entrepreneurs being heard, or are they even becoming politicians?
Yes, so that was my point to after previous speaker, that maybe it's different in smaller countries, as in Lithuania. It's really, sometimes it's very easy process to make things better. It's not a long process. We, as Startup Lithuania, we are trying to be in between the startup ecosystem and the policy makers. We are making a lot of policy proposals, and a lot of things were changed in recent years, and we are still working a lot in this direction. We are trying to be very close to the community, and when we are a really small country, it's very easy to reach any person in the politics. Even I think if you would have a wish to have a meeting with Minister of Economy and Innovations, you will find a friend or a neighbor or a friend of a friend, and you can do it. It's really a small country and easy to reach anyone. So we work very closely with the community of startups, startup founders, employees, with the whole startup ecosystem. And we are trying to know the problems and the pain points, and to make these proposals for the government and to have those changes. So I think it really depends maybe of the size of the country and the will of the politicians to make a better place for startups or innovative businesses.
Thanks. Excellent point. So I can agree. I guess it really depends on the will and the motivation of people. Maybe the question is, how can we also, as entrepreneurs, tell those politicians and those decision makers that, well, innovation technology is something that is pretty important. But Anshul, maybe you have some insights on that, because you also wanted to add something to the discussion.
Yes, thank you so much. Actually, a good part of the work that we also do revolves around policy change. And to be very honest, regardless of whether you're from India, you're an Indian, or you're from outside, if you're working in India, you will face challenges if you're trying to implement policy level impact. It really won't matter where you're from. I think there are two things that I want to address specific to how the Indian ecosystem is. One is that it will make a difference which state in the country you decide to start in, because there are some states in India which are extremely progressive with regards to helping the startups of that state. So, for example, there is a state called Telangana. They have a very progressive startup policy. You get access to the government administration that is working with startups very easily. You have access to policymakers. You have access to incubators that put you in touch with policymakers. And you can really cut through the bureaucracy if you're starting in the right location in India. Having said that, one of the tactics that we often use, and this is a more hands-on tactic that entrepreneurs could utilize, is something very popularly known as power mapping. So once you've figured out what you really want to change and who's your target, you kind of figure out what their drivers are, who they are linked to. Do you have any personal connections with people who may have personal connections with them? And what is the level, of distance that you have from the person who's in the position of power? And I think really kind of mapping that power. And I won't talk too much about it. You can, of course, the people who are listening can of course Google it and find out more about the idea of power mapping. But as they kind of go about power mapping, they should be able to very easily identify the different stakeholders that will work in their favor, and use them to really reach out to the policymakers that they have. Another very important thing to mention here is that if you're either from the US or from the European Union, both of those regions actually have embassies that provide a great deal of support to entrepreneurs that come from those regions. So if you want to reach out to policymakers having been from these areas, it should be very easy to just work with your embassies, because pretty much all of them have a startup program where they're helping entrepreneurs, both ones who are coming from other countries and ones who are from Indians as well. So I would just recommend that if you think of this problem from that point of view, it should be not as difficult to look at it. Of course, it's a big challenge, but you should probably find a solution in these areas.
Perfect. Thanks. And thanks for bringing up this term of power mapping. I think that's a very interesting approach that makes perfect sense, and also connected to the things that we've heard previously. So it also, of course, depends on the dynamics in each country, but it's usually quite transparent on who's the person to talk to get in touch with them. So as you've already mentioned in your intros and also right now, there needs to be some sort of strategic approach to most things. And I think that's also the case when it comes to talking about internationalization. So let's say for all the entrepreneurs out there, how to get this done? I mean, now we're talking with people from so many different countries, so many different continents. Culture is so different in all of our countries. The circumstances are so different. So how should entrepreneurs decide on what to do in terms of becoming an international company? And when is actually the point in time where you should think about internationalizing, where it's either about entering new markets in terms of selling your product, or really establishing an additional office head or relocating your headquarters, maybe. So what's the point in time, and how can we do this? So how to develop an internationalization strategy, basically? Who wants to share thoughts on that? Caro, you want to go first? Cool.
Yes, I can. Yes. Okay. So as talking as an entrepreneur, now to other entrepreneurs, I think that the time, everybody, we're used to listen and hear that timing is fundamental. Well, it is, but it's fundamental timing for one point, and then where do you want to go? So now I have heard now amazing countries. I don't know how to compete with Austria and that amazing presentation that was done. Israel, which is like an icon in terms of entrepreneurship. Then in India, Lithuania have actually thought about actually going to Lithuania, because I know the policies they have. So it's like, what do we do? My recommendation is basically, I think, 3 points. One is to have a solid base. And what do I mean by solid base? Is wherever you want to start your company, or you already start your company, you need to be solid. You need to have a sustainable business model. I'm not saying you need to be winning a lot of money, but you need to be actually kind of solid as a company. So then you can just look to another frontier and decide to go to Israel, to Chile, to India. That's the second point of my answer. But first one is to worry that you have actually a solid business model that is sustainable. That's my first recommendation. If you want to keep your headquarters in Europe, for example, and just expand to other region, which is totally fine. And then the second is what region to go. And I personally think that also has to do with 2 factors. One is, what are you doing? Is it going to be reliable? Is it going to be really useful and of utility if you do your business in Latin America? Or maybe it's really high tech and you should just jump to Israel. Or maybe you're trying to buy transportation solution and you prefer a huge market at once and you just jump to India. It really depends what you're doing. So I think today Latin America is really strong in social innovation. Chile is really, really strong in social innovation. So if you really want to impact socially, I think in that case, Latin America could be an option, but it's also it always depends on your product. And it also depends, and this is my personal view, it's like when you're an entrepreneur, you're actually running your own business and it's your decision in life. It's not like someone said you need to be an entrepreneur. It's my decision. So if you take the decision, also look for a market that you also like. And Lisa, you said at the beginning, I really like Latin America. So you need to feel comfortable with the culture because you will need to work with those people. You need to follow their policy. You need to speak their language. So I think that's also relevant. And sometimes we forget about that. And at the end, we're doing business, and that's it's a must. And then my last point, and with this I close, which is related to also a little public policy, not policy, but actually the red tape. How do you cut that red tape? How do you go to a market and you're not just shut down by a government policy that you have no idea? Is you do need to understand that legal framework of the market you're going. I mean, that's a must for me. And how do you do it? Because I don't know. Well, you can always have access to any lawyer, to maybe a consultancy firm that can give you some information, but it's important. If you really want to do a big business, you need to care about the legal framework of the country you're jumping into. That's how I see it.
Very good points and very hands-on approaches. And especially, of course, like the point that you said, also go to markets that you like because it's your business at the end of the day. So my choice would be rather obvious, I guess, trying not to be biased too much. But I love it that you gave some really hands-on advice on what to do. And maybe I would even take this to the next level before we take the next question from the audience and hand it over to Omri, because you already mentioned that, well, some specific cases make more sense to do in Israel, get to know the community, get connected and learn from them. But how, and I think this is something that shows that there are some cultural differences and therefore it can get difficult. So how do you do that? So let's say, okay, we come to Israel because we want to learn from the startup ecosystem, get connected, meet investors. How do I, as a foreigner, become part of a community and of a culture that is not mine? So what is your advice on that and maybe learnings you want to share with us?
Thank you, Lisa. So yeah, it is a huge challenge, and I think it always is. You can't kind of cut over that. But what you can do is a few things. So one, it's always about people. So in the end, if there's a market that you're considering and you know someone who is from there, get in touch with that person. Even though they might not be the right person or able to actually help you, they would probably be able to explain to you a little bit about the culture, what is legitimate, what is, what people are accustomed to, and they would probably be able to connect you with the next person. So it's a cycle. It takes time. You have to be patient. You have to do the work, talk to one person, then two people, and then go on and on. So that's one recommendation. Another one is that today, I think the ecosystems themselves are very, very aware and very willing to attract international entrepreneurs. So if you just have a look at what the ecosystem is built of, who are the ecosystem builders, what intermediaries exist there. There are, from Techstars and international accelerators to local ones that are open to international companies. That might be the best way because it's a soft landing pad. It's someone who will kind of lead you through the process and will communicate with you on a more international level and kind of open doors for you. And I think the third thing, which is a huge challenge today, is that you have to physically be there. There's no substitute, I think, to actually meeting the people, going to places, meeting the users themselves. If it's a different culture than what you're used to, you have to understand not only the policy or the regulation or how the investors are working in this country, but you also have to get to know the people themselves, the end users, the people you want to impact. So in that sense, I think it's really incredibly important to actually go and be in that place. And I think from what I hear with many entrepreneurs, this is probably the biggest challenge today because it's not always possible.
That's a very good point that you made. And well, this actually leads to a very obvious question. So what do we do in this COVID situation? So shall entrepreneurs just be like, okay, let's postpone the start of the internationalization. Let's not go to new countries now, which might mean that they're losing opportunities and losing business. And of course, with the potential that other companies will still do it and get international or actually conquer the market themselves. So what's your advice on that? I don't know, Omri, if you want to cover that one as well, or if someone else wants to jump in. But I think that's a question that almost everyone is having. Is now the time to internationalize, or shall we wait for better days. Oh, Roberta already raised her hand, so maybe I will jump over to you. So Roberta, you are still muted, so we can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay, so thanks. It's really great question, I think, and it really depends on a startup. If you have opportunities and possibilities, if your product is interesting at the moment, you should grab this possibility, because a lot of great companies started in really difficult times. And we've conducted a survey of Lithuanian startups, and we are looking at their situation, how are they doing in these times. So a lot of startups declared that they really see a lot of possibilities in these times to conquer the competitors' market, to hire talents from the competitors. So a lot of them, they are using these opportunities, and they are even hiring people. Their turnovers are growing. So overall, the situation in startups, I think, are different than in traditional businesses. And there are really great possibilities, even at this time. So just look what you can do and grab these possibilities.
A very good point that you made. So when we look at the big tech companies that we're seeing, let's talk, for example, about Airbnb. They also started after crises. So yes, but that's probably also, again, the nature of entrepreneurship and our positive mindset. Situations like this can be a big opportunity. But Susanne, handing it over to you now, what's your take on internationalizing in times of COVID-19?
Yeah, Roberta mentioned everything really great. It's just about the product, I think. Yeah, it depends, because in life science, it's really huge now. And there are so many opportunities. Also, digitalization is a big trend. And there are a lot of, we don't see it that much because it's like crisis everywhere, but there are so many winners due to the crisis. And I think just go for it if you have the right product and the right connections. And I think, go for it. That's what Roberta mentioned too. So I think positive vibes are always good and inspiring, and it just has to go up anyways, the economy. So I'm really positive, and I will support everybody. And there are a lot of opportunities and supporting systems also in our countries. So, and maybe we can all share and work together, share best practices and work together and support our companies also in the different markets.
Cool. Thanks for that. So I very much agree, but that's, again, my slightly biased opinion, but I truly believe that entrepreneurs and the companies that we are creating and the jobs that we are creating will be the drivers of economic growth in the next couple of months and even years. But Omri, you initially sort of started this conversation, so handing it back over to you.
Thank you. I very much agree with what was said. And I would like to add that, as always, a crisis is also a new opportunity. And what I see in the last few months is that although we can't physically meet people and go to the places where it's important for us to visit, what does happen is, one, the social and environmental issues, which a year ago might have been like a nice to have for some companies, now it is becoming so clear that it is a must have. So necessity is much more, I think, felt in companies, and they're searching for actual solutions, and they're in a hurry. They need to adopt them. They need to embed them. So that's one opportunity. And the other one is the fact that you don't need to kind of set a meeting for like 3 weeks from now, because you would have to buy a plane ticket and go there for a week and spend all that time. And instead, you can just meet on Zoom or Teams or whatever tomorrow, get things going, and then have another meeting 3 days after. So what happens essentially is that processes are being accelerated. Things that would take months and months 2 years ago are now moving at a very, very fast pace. For entrepreneurs, these are extremely good news. So you might have to be very, very focused and not take too much on yourself, and also kind of put a star and always remember that everything that you're doing right now will have to be validated once things kind of go back to normal, if they will, and when that happens. But until then, certainly grab the opportunity, see these accelerated processes as your opportunity to make that leap. And you know, in minimal resources and minimal time, you can find yourself with new clients in new markets, making a lot of new connections. So again, a crisis is also an opportunity.
I very much agree. So thanks for sharing your opinion on that. We have two questions from the audience that I would like to cover. Maybe we can connect those two. So the first question is, what are the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs in your country are facing? So we've heard about all the praise for your countries, but I assume that some things are not going that well. And the second question is, what are the top 3 things that entrepreneurs in your country are looking for when expanding to Europe or other foreign markets? So what's going not so well in your countries, and why are they going to other countries, and what are they specifically looking for? Anshul, you were the fastest one to raise your hands. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. So I'll keep it quick. I think the biggest challenge that we are facing in a country like India is that it's just too many people. And what that also means is that it's also a very competitive market, right? There's a very, very big chance that what you're working on, there are at least 10 or 20 other people who are working on it, which also means that the access to funding, which is still limited, it's not in proportion to the number of startups that are starting in the country, is very, 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 very limited for you. There's a high crunch when it comes to access to that money. And that process itself becomes a huge challenge for entrepreneurs, especially very early stage entrepreneurs who may actually have a better mousetrap or a better solution than something that already exists out there. It's not a very unique problem when it comes to India, but it's definitely accentuated in a country like India. At the same time, I think another big problem is that, while entrepreneurship and startups are emerging as a big conversation point in the country, there is still some difficulty in acceptance of the idea that you can take a big risk and you can go and become an entrepreneur and let go of a traditional job. So I think a more cultural shift is kind of required for sure. So I would mark those two out as the biggest challenges, definitely the biggest challenges. And I think when entrepreneurs are expanding to other countries, especially say, for instance, a country in Europe, we are definitely looking for partners who can act as co-founders or organizations that can be incubators for the idea in that country, because they will have a lot more localized context and knowledge. Definitely funding to make sure that the market that's a lot more costlier than, say, a country like India is also financed, fairly well, and access to networks, really. Because I think when you go to a country like Austria, for example, or Germany or wherever else, the one thing that really kind of sets you apart is how quickly can you have access to similar networks in those countries. So I would say that those 3 really become the key in a situation like this.
Thanks. Thank you so much for the insights. So Susanne, I'm not sure if you're still raising your hand or if you want to add something. I would just pick you and ask you to go next, and then we're going to move on to Caro.
Okay, no, don't worry, I can go on. Well, I think the qualified people is the most challenge in Austria, to find really good qualified staff, especially in the mint areas. So that's one challenge, of course, I think, for companies. And also it's competitive, the market. So small startups have to have like a nice portfolio when working again or challenging each other with the big companies in mindset of brain drain. So that's definitely a challenge in Austria, to find good people. And also maybe the venture capital situation. The first part with financing is really good covered, but the second part, when you need really, really the big money, the high money amounts, that could be tricky and difficult, but we are working on this. Everybody knows that problem, and I think business angels, private and public investors are working good together, and their money is there, and for good ideas you find the right investor. And I think that these are challenges, everybody knows it, and the crowd has also an impact, the startups, and I think the mindset is there, and I think this shouldn't be problems, that's challenges, and they can be solved, I think, in Austria.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. As Austrian, I think I would agree that the talent part can be a bit tricky, and also people coming from outside of the European Union sometimes have a hard time actually getting started in Austria, but also something that the government is hopefully finally working on Caro, you wanted to go next.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so biggest challenge in Chile is to the investment, but it's pretty similar for what just Susanne mentioned. So we do have a lot of seed money. We do have you have money until like Series A, which is like $1 million, 1 million euros around. But if you want to raise more money, it's still difficult because we do have really conservative investors in general, because Chile is a very conservative society. So culturally, that's still something that has not changed. So on the bottom, you do have a really big culture change in terms of movement, entrepreneurs, but on the top, you still have some risk-adverse dominance that is complex. So that's a big challenge. And then the second challenge is that we tend to follow trends. So it tends to be a market that follows trends. So if you bring something that is new or that no one has been a winner before, they're like, no, I'm not sure, I'm not putting money into this. Until you actually, 3 years later, you come back and you're like, no, look, it worked. And they're like, oh, I'm going to put money into these kind of companies. So that's, of course, something negative. And in terms of the second question, in terms of what do Chileans, and I will refer here to Hispanic America, think when they move to Europe, I think they search for validation. I don't think in general Latin Americans come to Europe to like conquer Europe. They come to Europe to learn from Europe, which is positive or negative. It's okay, it's fine, but it's still, I think we still have culturally a relation like top and bottom, which is not good for the region, but it's the fact, and it's like that. And I think it's good for Europeans because you do have a really open market that will, if you want to go and jump there, they will be like, please come and we want to learn and blah, blah, blah. So I don't have 3 points. I think that's like the basic points. If you have Latinos coming here, they come to learn, they come to enter accelerator programs, and they come to actually try to run the company from here, but in a really subtle way and be like, oh, I want to know what is happening around, and not as conquering Europe is different. That's how I see it.
That's a very interesting approach, especially also the topic of following the trend. I think this is something that a lot of people in different ecosystems see, that someone has to prove it, and then it sort of gets this approval sign, and then everybody's basically investing, also from an investor's point of view, in the same things. But talking about those pioneering people or not so pioneering people, that was a term that Nkem brought up in her introductory rounds, that you're seeing some pioneers in your area and also in Nigeria and Africa as well. So what's your take on the challenges in your country, and why do people look for expanding internationally?
Okay, so I think in terms of challenges, we have them all. Every single thing that's been mentioned here, whether it is digital skills and having the right type of human capital that can actually do the job, I think we are, because of the digital divide, the furthest behind, right? And there are a lot of, which means it's an opportunity as well, because there are a lot of startups that are focused on digital skills development here on the continent, right? So for entrepreneurs, that's a really great, it's a problem, but it's an opportunity at the same time. Funding, and especially unlocking local funding, is a really big challenge. What we've seen is that startups that start here in Nigeria get offshored to Silicon Valley because the founders go into programs like Y Combinator, and then, when they get investment in the US and they are told incorporate in Delaware, who's going to say no to $8 million? Nobody, right? So you can't blame the founders, because if you can't get the money at home, then you will go wherever the money is, right? Still creating solutions for the continent and for your country. But what it means is that the taxes that you pay in Delaware, you don't pay in Nigeria. So there's a really big loss for the Nigerian economy. And I think that the Nigerian government hasn't really understood the massive opportunity in the digital economy, right? So I think there's also that disconnect between policymakers and the actual ecosystem, and creating that enabling environment, whether the enabling environment is to ensure that we have policies that don't obstruct startups to actually start. What we've seen here is that policymakers are really focused on generating revenue for the government. So if they see a sector that has startups that are doing well, immediately they create license fees, they create other type of taxes that then basically create barriers to entry for other startups. And we've seen this especially in the insurtech scene, where there were a lot of insurance aggregators, and then there came this big license fee, and there's maybe like one or two of these aggregators left, and everybody working in that space is really working under the radar and looking at other ways of sort of monetizing. And there have been no new players come into that field for the last 5 years simply because the license fees are so high. So this is where policy becomes counterproductive, because it creates hurdles as opposed to making the road as smooth as possible. So I think those are really the biggest challenges that we're facing here. In terms of what entrepreneurs are looking for when expanding to Europe, I think it's the first thing is market size, right? And actual consumers with disposable income, consumers that understand the technology. Because you have to understand that, and this is why I said, you have to be careful with Africa's biggest economy, 200 million people. Ooh, sounds all fantastic and great, but the truth is that, more than 50% of the people still live on $1 a day, right? We have 33.5% unemployment here. So when you think about those type of statistics, your market size is very small. Right. So I think when we look at, startups that are expanding into Europe or America, or startups that have a focus of having their off-taker market in those markets, you often see that, it's really about where can we earn? If we can't earn here on the continent, where do we go so that we can earn? And a lot of the time, these models don't necessarily mean that the business doesn't stay in Africa. So if you look at, I'm sure many of you are familiar with Andela, for example, right? Andela basically started as an organization that was training developers and then basically outsourcing these developers to big companies in the US. I think 2 years ago or so, they raised $100 million in their Series D. So it's really big. They've expanded across Africa into 5 countries. They've changed their business model slightly now. But companies like that are still very much on the continent, right? However, they don't serve anyone on the continent, which is good and bad, because they're earning money and they're changing lives of the people here who have the talent and who can serve the rest of the world. But it also takes away from our own, technology talent. So that brain drain happens even though the people are actually here. So I think really earning power, being able to earn in foreign exchange. Our currency has just done a complete deep dive this year, and we've lost almost half the value of the currency. So anyone that can unlock opportunities to earn in dollars or earn in euros will take those opportunities, simply because what you get, so even if it's 100 euros that you're getting there, the value of it here is so high. And what you can buy with it is so high. And the truth is that you can't charge anyone here that same 100 euros for that same service. So I think those are sort of the key areas that I think, startups would look to when expanding.
Gotcha. So thanks for sharing this very in-depth insights. Super interesting. And we can see that we're definitely talking about extremely different ecosystems and different challenges to some extent. So one personal question attached to this one. So did you personally ever think about, doing business in other countries and really using all the opportunities out there and leaving Nigeria?
No, I think there's too much work to be done here. A lot of my friends, think I'm really crazy, and they're like, you can live anywhere in the world. You're a German citizen. You can go back to Germany. You can live anywhere in Europe. You can go to America. You're a tech talent. You can go to Canada. And yes, I can. But the truth is that if we don't do the work that is required, I think that the continent will fall even further behind. And I grew up in Nigeria. This is home to me, in as much as, my first language is German. I was in Germany every year to visit my grandmother, but that's not home, and it will never be, right? So I think looking at the power of technology and really looking at what technology can do to transform this continent and this country, that for me has always been what has driven me, right? And what has allowed me to really play a pivotal role in building this ecosystem here, right? And my dad is also in technology, and he's been doing this for over 30 years as well, right? So it's also something that I think sort of runs in the family. And, it's work that is to build a legacy. It's not work that is just like, oh, okay, let's work and make some money. But it's work to make change. It's work to leave a legacy. It's work to impact people. And I think that for me, that's really what life is about, right? So in as much as, there've been many opportunities to explore other countries and take on other jobs in other places, for me, this is where I feel my calling is. So no, I will not be going anywhere. I will be here and will welcome anyone who wants to, dip their toe into the African ecosystem, especially here in Nigeria.
Gotcha. Thanks for sharing this very personal insights. I think this was very on point, and it shows that as entrepreneurs, and I also truly believe that it's there's more related to this and to this sort of career that we've chosen than just making money and setting up a business. It's really about taking responsibility, not only for us and our employees and our teams, but really for society and also economy and our home countries to some extent. So, Caro, I think you're raising your hand. What do you want to add? No, you're not raising your hand, still raised.
I can add something, but no, I wasn't. I was just thinking, actually.
Gotcha. So otherwise, I would, as we just have 8 minutes left, and I think we need to be on time today, I would also love to actually relate the next question to, somehow what was just discussed, because I'm wondering what's happening with ecosystems, because we are seeing these global opportunities. We could go to Delaware, set up our companies there. We can go to so many different countries. But what happens then? Do entrepreneurs actually come back to their home markets? Do they come back to your country specifically? And do they then contribute something to, a flourishing startup ecosystem? Maybe I would love to start the discussion with Omri, because I think that's something that's happening, or something that is a topic in Israel, or Israel is quite good in that, giving back to the ecosystem with experienced entrepreneurs.
Well, it's a good question. I'm not sure I know exactly how to answer that, but I think Israeli entrepreneurs, I think their best quality. There are some that are not maybe the best, but something that is really kind of part of the culture here is to change all the time at a very fast pace. Don't get too in touch with anything, with your business model, with your idea, with opportunities that you've identified. So people here adjust very quickly and are very, very agile. So the ecosystem here has tremendously gotten tremendously creative about working when COVID is here. We're not sure how long it will take, but for now, you see that the ecosystem, after there were about, I think, 2 months of shock, the ecosystem is working almost business as usual. So everything is online, but everything is actually happening. We just to give you an example, we just held an international summit 2 days ago, which we had, I think, people from 31 countries attending, over 1,000 people. It was incredible. And the biggest challenge is to enable engagement between the people. And we see that many are kind of finding it a bit challenging, but are doing what they need to do in order to cope with this new reality. So you see all kinds of networking platforms that are online. You see all kinds of new offerings that are being brought for accelerators, for funding opportunities, for a lot of different things. So I think in many ways the ecosystem is flexible enough to be able to cope with it, but it's not there yet. Of course, it's not the real thing yet.
Thanks. Thank you for this insights. Right, so it's so exciting to see, well, all different stories in these different ecosystems. Well, cool. So, yeah, I am a bit moved by all the things that you've mentioned, all the really cool insights, because there's just so much to learn from every one of you. But I think that's also a sort of specific mindset to always take away sort of the learnings that we have. Okay, so Roberta, do you want to go next? Because you raised your hand.
Yes. So as Lithuania is a really small market, our startups have to think globally. Sometimes they even start already in different markets and just develop a startup in Lithuania and they are selling in different markets. So they do have to open companies abroad, of course. But what we see that they still keep R&D centers or tech centers or even headquarters in Lithuania. As I mentioned and at the intro, we really have great talent pool. And it's maybe it's a bit cheaper to hire a talent than in Austria, for example, or Berlin. And the living costs for the talents are cheaper. And what else? That we really have great work-life balance. Lithuania is a small country, a lot of green areas. Vilnius itself it's really small country, the capital. You can reach any point of the city within 1 hour when it's a big traffic. So normally when there's no traffic in 10-15 minutes. So it's really great place to live and to develop a startup. So we see that our entrepreneurs, they are still holding their ties with Lithuania and giving back to the community.
Gotcha. Thanks for these insights. Well, a bit jealous of the 1 hour traffic situation. Not the case here in Vienna, unfortunately. Cool. So, Caro, you want to add something?
Yes. So in Chile, what's happened is that they all try, big companies, like big entrepreneurs, they keep something in Chile in terms of course, talent and maybe just like a kind of headquartered, but at the end, the companies usually are incorporated in the example that is probably similar that we have in Nigeria. Most of them are incorporated in the US, in Delaware, because the money is there. So I think that the issue, and I would say that the issue that we still have is that whoever owns the money still has the power, and you can see that as it's a reality, of course. And it happens that even though they will eventually like to have their main legally company in Chile because they're Chileans and, like proud and everything, they can't. Because if not, the investor will not put money into them, So that's what happened in Chile. At least, and I know is basically what also happens in the region. So it's still a challenge.
Yeah. I think that's actually quite similar here in Austria, but maybe, Susanne, you want to add some words on that, and we just have 2 minutes left, but I think you're going to find some nice insights from Austria.
Then I'm doing the closing. I think we are a little bit more traditional, more regional bonded, the Austrians. And I see this with successful entrepreneurs, especially when they get older. The mission is important, the sustainability, and they want to give back. I think that's the experience, and they give back to the ecosystem because money is not everything or success. So we are pretty lucky to get to them and have them as investors and joining the ecosystem, being peers for our startups and always be available. And they have a lot of knowledge, and we don't have to forget this, I think. My closing statement for Styria.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. If the audience is wondering, where did Anshul go? Unfortunately, his internet connection broke down. But I'm pretty sure that he would love to greet you all and also say thank you for this panel. So from my end, thanks for this extremely interactive, insightful and meaningful discussion and sharing your very personal insights and takes and experiences. I'm pretty sure that everyone has learned a lot from the discussion that we had and can take away a lot for, well, everyday business, but also some general approaches on how to deal with this whole topic of entrepreneurship and setting up businesses. Thank you so much. Before we get kicked off the stage, I'm going to close it officially. Thanks, wishing you all a great day. And I think I'm also allowed to say, wishing you all a very Merry Christmas and hope to see you soon at another WSA event. Bye-bye, everyone.